Hey, gang, welcome to the Power of Nine podcast. I'm your host, Aaron Eggert. This week's guest is the founder of a platform called Schoolz that is revolutionizing how students consume educational content. We will dig into all that and more with today's guest, Mondo Davison. Mondo, how are you, my friend?
I am in a season of transition, but transition is good. And so we are rocking and rolling. This week is actually a family trip to Vegas. And so being able to just vibe out with the family is going to be an epic experience.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love to hear that. I am very happy to see that anybody who is watching this on video and has seen Mondo before knows that he only owns one t-shirt. Yep, it is a t-shirt that says the Black Tech Guy. And I wanted to make sure to just address that right off the bat here. I love the fact that I was going to send you a Coalition 9 shirt and you respectfully declined because you've got your own swag, and I respect that. I couldn't go around wearing your shirt either. So let's just throw that on the table.
I was like, okay, maybe I should get a hat. Maybe I should get something. Man, when I go to like networking events and they're like, here's a shirt, I'm like, thank you, but I don't know where I'm going to put it.
I love it. Well, you were honest with me. If you wanted to use it for washing your car or something like that, you could have done that, but you respectfully declined. And thank you for not taking my $20 t-shirt and turning it into a wash rag. Yeah. So I want to, anybody who's listening to this podcast knows I kind of go through the journey of your life, and you are a St. Paul kid. So tell me a little bit about your upbringing here in the Twin Cities in St. Paul, and then kind of paint me a little bit of a picture about what your upbringing was about.
Yeah, so honestly, from memory, my journey started at 10 years old. My mom died in a tragic motorcycle accident at 10. Me and my younger brother, who is 3 years younger, moved in with my father. Prior to, we had already had a great relationship. And so that was like the start of my life. Honestly, anything before 10 years old, I don't remember, period. Like, I don't know what that life was like. And so growing up with my pops was just super loving, right? If you think about that family environment where you're just filled with positivity, support, energy, all that stuff. I just so happened to be in the sports. And so basketball was my drug of choice in the sports arena.
Yeah.
And so my pops just pushed me and pushed me and my brother. And so I would just say, like, my upbringing was, you can do or accomplish or be any and everything you want to be. Extremely cliche, but I internalized it, right? I feel like my dad put this S on my chest and just made me feel like I can do all things. And now as an adult, I just never lost that, right? I just still have the same, like, oh, if I want to go to the moon, I'm gonna go to the moon. And so I think that's part of like my secret sauce as a human, just not having any reservations on what I can accomplish.
Did your dad, was he a big part of you wanting to be a better basketball player? Did you guys play one-on-one a lot or any of that kind of stuff? Was he a good basketball player?
Nah, so he was considered the athlete in the family, right? And so growing up, my grandmother is small little Hispanic lady, and his father died early. And so she was just like, yo, be a good human, work and do all those things. And so practicing on his skill as an athlete wasn't something that was pushed. And so he didn't reach the level that he probably felt he could have. And so now having a son like me, similar talent, he's just like, well, then you need to outwork everybody.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so because he recognized his shortcomings in his journey, it was just like, you can do the thing, but you can't be soft. You better go out and work harder than everybody else. And so that's what it was. They just poured into me to be the best.
Well, at some point you did have to like start beating him in either horse or one-on-one or something like that. What age was, obviously after 10, but what age was that you started dominating him?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, 8th grade, 9th grade is when it's like, oh, okay, I've come into my own a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was all good. He coached me early on, like assistant coach of a team, and so it was always just fun. But he was tenacious. Like, if you come to my games, you knew who my father was in the stands because you knew who he was yelling at.
Yeah.
But that drove me, right? It wasn't negative. It was always positive, but he was definitely the voice in the gym.
Well, then you transitioned into high school, and you were kind of a big deal when it came to basketball, right?
Oh man, that was a different life.
I know,
It seems so. It
but it was
seems
life.
it was long ago, but yeah, it was my life. It was, I went to Central and all the like accolades of like scoring champ, MVP of blah 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 blah, like all those individual accolades were part of my journey. However, like we never won the state championship. We never even competed at the highest level to even come close to it.
Mm,
And so it was interesting, like not being extremely talented, but lacking in collective leadership skills, right? It's just
mhm,
like, oh,
mhm.
that's the best player on the team, but I fell short in like I'm not the point guard. I'm not Chris Paul, right? Like telling everybody, getting in everybody's tail and understanding the power of voice and building that community. And that didn't come later until college, actually. So
So what was that experience like going from the man, right, at Central St. Paul Central High School to then transitioning into college, being BMOC, big man on campus, going down to college?
yeah, it was eye-opening, right? It was like there was no basketball court in the Twin Cities I would go to, and somebody's not like, oh, that's Mondo. He plays for Central, or he could hoop, blah blah blah. And then to go down and try to walk on to the University of Tennessee, and literally not being anybody, right? And it's a new space, but it's like walking in
Yeah.
with confidence, like, hey, I've lived a life of always dominating on the court. And honestly, it was walking into tryouts. There's about 25 of us in this walk-on tryout, and tryouts lasted 20 minutes. Team
Mm.
already knew they weren't picking up anybody from the squad. And so you can imagine how crushing that was, thinking everything's just about talent. And if you work hard and you're talented, it's all going to work out. And so that was the first time like a basketball door was slammed in my face. And it was humbling. Like it was definitely humbling. And then I transitioned to Florida A&M University my
Mhm.
sophomore year because my best friend recruited me to go there, not for athletics, but just academically. He's like, this is going to change your life.
Cool.
And it was the same thing that second year. Tryouts was 30 minutes. It was about 20 of us. And I was just like, wow, what is this game that I don't understand?
Wow.
And later on in my entrepreneurial journey, I was just like, oh, it's about relationships, right?
Mm.
Like so many people are in the right position to show off their talent because the relationships were established. And it's a lesson that I never forgot.
Yeah, how have you taken some of those lessons so you talked about when you were growing up, you had so many positive reinforcements in your life, your dad being a big part of that. And then you basically this sports related, you're getting doors slammed in your face. And obviously, like you alluded to, a very humbling experience. How have you used some of those lessons that you learned in what I would, kind of classify as failure a little bit of what was that all about, and how has that driven you moving forward?
Yeah, so um, I am an honest person, right?
Mm,
And when I say that, I just mean honest with myself. And I remember when I was ending my basketball journey, 25, 26, 27, people, I would run into them. They'd be like, you still hooping? Like, where are you playing at? And I'm just like, no, I'm not playing anymore. Oh, why aren't you playing? And my response is always like, I wasn't good enough. I should have practiced harder.
mm,
Like, just straight up. It was nobody else's fault. Even the 20, 30-minute tryouts I was at, it was if you would have went in there like LeBron James or Steph Curry and didn't miss anything from half court, they would have noticed you. And so
mm.
I just always internalize everything and say that it's my fault. And so even in this entrepreneurial space, like it's always my fault. There's always something I could have did different or better if the outcome isn't what I wanted it to be. And literally that's the biggest carryover. Like learn from these mistakes and work harder. Because yeah, somebody's always out there working harder than you, and so
Right.
you can't
Yeah.
take your feet off the gas.
Yeah, that's right. So what made you decide then to become an educator? So at some time in that college journey, some kind of switch flipped that you said, I want to teach. What was
Yeah,
that all about?
yeah, that was the universe putting me where I was supposed to be is what I'd say, right?
Mm,
So I moved back to Minnesota, and at the time I think I was at Augsburg, and I was going to finish out my last 15 credits to graduate.
mm,
And then I was like, I think that was 2008, 2009.
okay.
And I was like, I don't really care about this degree thing. Like, it was a crisis in America. Like, markets were crashing and all that. And I was just like, yeah, I don't know if this is for me. And so a seventh grade math teacher at Ramsey Junior High so happened to be a principal in St. Paul around that same time. And I ran into him and he was just like, hey, do you want a job in education? Just being a TA? I said, sure. And so that was my start. Literally just had no desire, no passion to go into education. And so my first year in education was like, no, this is okay. It's cool. It's a job. And then mind you, I was a moderately spoiled kid. And when I say spoiled, like I was able to live my kid life. I was able to be a teenager. I didn't have to work a job. My dad was like, as long as you got good grades, like I'll sponsor going to the movies, doing all the regular stuff in life.
Mm,
And so when I started working in education, I was like, oh, this is what a 40-hour work week looks and feels like. Oh, and this is what you're paying me as a TA. And it was another humbling experience. Like that is a lot of time and a lot
right.
of effort just for that. And I know it's not all about money, but it was like, hey, this system is broken to me right away because educators, the great ones, like pour their heart and life and time into like impacting young kids, and to not be paid equitably was clear to me.
Hmm.
I say all that to say my second year as an educator, I was like, oh, I was put here for a reason. And it was
Mm,
literally like looking at young Black boys in the classroom, not reading, not engaged. I was a B student in school. Like I knew how to do school. It wasn't entertaining or engaging, but I just knew how to test and do homework. But being in the classroom, I saw myself in so many young people, and I was just like, wow, 20 years later, we're still doing a lot of the same things in the classroom, and it's not working for people that look like me. And so
yeah.
over time, I leaned into creating solutions for it.
Yeah. So that's how long were you a educator for?
Um, about 7 years, end of 2009 to middle of 2016.
And then when did you transform into the black tech guy?
Great question. uh, so I started as an educator end of 2009. January 7th, 2010, very defining moment in my life. I watched this special on CNBC called Planet of the Apps. And it was literally Apple's 1 hour special saying, like, hey, this iPhone thing and App Store is going to be a big deal. You should learn how to develop apps. And literally, like, that was the whole pitch. But it hooked me from that day. I was like, I want to do that.
Wow.
And so from that day forward, I was like, I'm gonna get into this game. I'm gonna understand it. I made all the mistakes ever, like wasted so much money, doing it wrong for so long. And through that, I would say like year 2, 3, I just adopted the Black Tech Guy brand. And a lot of it was out of insecurity, to be honest.
Hmm.
Being in Minnesota and the tech scene being extremely like white male dominated,
Yep.
I would walk into networking events and have this reservation like, yo, am I supposed to be here? Like, I'm not a seasoned programmer. A lot of this stuff in this game, I don't understand. And so somebody was like, either you're going to own it or you're just going to be in the back all the time. And so I owned it. He was like, hey, I'm making the shirt and you're just going to go in and own being the Black Tech Guy in the
Yeah.
room. And it just stuck. And so, where are we 7, 8 years later, I haven't worn another shirt any day since.
Yeah, yeah, and even regardless of what you're doing, from whether it be Schoolz or when you were doing shorties or any of the other stuff that you've dabbled in the past, you've always been Mondo at theblacktechguy.com. That is, you bought the domain, which makes it real, and you've got t-shirts to prove it.
Yep. It was so interesting because part of the early conversation was, how is this going to be received long
Mhm.
term, right? Like leading with Black sometimes isn't received the right way. And I was just like, yo, if that's not received of me like self-identifying as something, then and you don't like it, then we're probably not supposed to be connected anyways. And
Right, right.
so it was very interesting just navigating that whole thing.
I love that attitude. And so while you were kind of evolving into this persona that you've built, and you started dabbling in tech, and you were inspired by this show, and what was the first thing that you created on your own?
Yeah, so the first app we ever created, or I ever created, was this app called Info. And literally it was like, hey, I'm not that confident just going in and approaching other attractive people, right? And so I
Right.
was like, well, maybe I can trigger the interaction, just proximity, like, oh, hey, you're close by. Hey, I'm gonna send you my info. I'm Mondo, here's my social media, and just to break the ice. And so it was definitely early Tinder iteration. We just didn't execute, right? Like how do you use, geolocation to connect with people?
Yeah.
And honestly, the biggest mistake with that was I had the idea, I was halfway through the build, and I saw a competitor in New York, and I was like, oh, I have to find a way to now change mine to make it better. And then I like compounded all these different features to like compete with them. But now
Mm.
knowing what I know now, it's just like it's not about 800 features. It's like you just need to solve the one problem really good and simple. And so, it took me 3-4 years just to learn that lesson. So yeah, that was the first one. Learned a ton, and I'd say 2017 was probably when I actually started to do things a little bit right. And that was just because I met a community of other entrepreneurial leaders that
Mhm.
literally just mentored me through the game. So
How many different things were you dabbling with in all those in all that times? So you started out with that app info, and how many different things were you messing around with?
yeah, I would say from the time that I stumbled upon that Apple special to leaving education, I launched um probably five different applications, rather it's apps or like web-based platforms. But it was like, yo, that's why I wanted to play in this game, because I'm like, if you have an idea, you can bring it to life, right? It's just like if you're a painter, it's like, hey, I have this thing in my brain, I'm gonna go paint it, or I'm gonna go write this story. And so it was just very cool to me to be able to just bring this thing to life. But I was just doing too much, right? Like I was doing
Right.
so many different things that I wasn't doing anything great.
Everyone's kind of got their own creative process. I'm gonna throw a complete curveball at you because we didn't even talk about this in show prep. But
It's
what
all
is
good.
your what is your what is your creative process? So you've come up with an idea, and you've got something boiling around in the back of your mind. You and I both, I think, would classify as visionaries, right? So as visionaries are thinking through things, you're something's going on, and you're manufacturing this in your brain. When does it get to where you're starting to make something a little tangible out of what's boiling up in there?
Yeah, literally it's, oh, here's a good idea. Okay, let me whiteboard all the gaps until I figure out I've shored up all the holes. And then what's my 1 to 2 minute pitch that I can then go pitch this thing to somebody and see how they respond. Literally, like that is always my first step. And either one, I pitch it and somebody doesn't understand. And then I'm like, oh, it's not clear enough or clean enough, or maybe the idea isn't as bold or audacious as I thought.
Mm,
Or I pitch it and they're like, oh, this is amazing. And then my next question then is, why wouldn't it work?
right.
And so giving the autonomy for people to tell you why it wouldn't work is like the secret sauce. And counterintuitive to people that haven't been in the tech game, right? They think
Mhm.
like, oh, I got to hold this thing close to the vest and not tell anybody. And it's just like, no, you actually need to tell everybody so they can tell you why it won't work, so you can actually fill the gaps. So literally that's it. I go through that process. And if everybody tells me all the holes and I'm like, oh, I actually know how to fill those holes very simple, and this is a simple, concrete idea to run with, then I typically just move forward with it.
And do you feel like the Twin Cities tech community does a good job of being collaborative in that sense, to where you can be vulnerable and transparent, throw something out there?
Yeah, I think that the Twin Cities specifically is a great nurturing early startup ecosystem. I think we have some gaps in like where the entry point is, because
Mm-hmm.
so many people are trying to do amazing things. And so sometimes like you don't know where to push somebody that wants to start something because there's so many options. I think where we need some growth in our community is like, well, what does the scale ecosystem look like? And honestly, like that was the value for Coalition 9. It was, hey, you've already kind of been through that early stage and now you want to take it to the next level. And so here's a community of people all trying to do that same thing and hit that next wave.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's what the community is missing.
Well, thanks for the non-solicited plug. I appreciate that. That was
No
nice
doubt.
that you snuck that in there. So let's transition then into Schoolz. So talk a little bit about what Schoolz was, even before it was Schoolz, and I just want to clarify that Schoolz with a Z. So if anybody's firing away Google searches, make sure it's Schoolz with a Z, and talk a little bit about like that, how that's transitioned into what it is today.
Yeah. So um as I said before, it was, hey, you have to create the simplest solution to a thing. And so
Mhm.
trying to build a bunch of features into like one product is probably not going to serve anybody great. And so what we ended up doing was we started to create these micro assets. So you talked about earlier, Shorties. Shorties was a platform where creators from the community could submit these short stories. But our kind of hook was, technically the reader could change the name of the main character, and then there was like some Mad Lib type experience. And so really we infused the reader into every single story. So now as Aaron is reading the story, you're the superhero, right, in the story, and Mondo's the villain. And so it just makes it personalizes it more. And so like that was one asset. We created that, and then we created another one around like music and hip hop and poetry, and like how it talks a lot about contemporary stuff,
Mhm.
um, and like how we can learn from it and tie it to historical context or tie it to whatever in the learning environment. Then we did another thing for documentaries. Anyways, we created these micro apps or web-based apps. And if you think about like Adobe with like Photoshop, Illustrator, Lightroom,
Mhm.
like that was our
Like a
vision.
like a suite.
Yep, like a
Yep.
suite of tools. But at the time, we didn't realize like, well, we have no brand identity called Adobe. And so like we were essentially like pushing and marketing these three different apps that like did work together kind of. Anyways, long story short, it was an error. It was a gap in like execution. And so over time I was just like, oh, I saw the domain Schoolz. I was just like, this makes sense. Like, can I
Mm.
just take these assets and or this strategy and put it all into this one platform, this marketplace, and make it work? And it seems like it did. And the big thing though was like, oh, do I buy this Schoolz domain for like $5,000, which was like insane.
Right.
But something told me that like, no, that it's actually worth it. And looking back, I think it was.
Yeah, good. So that's all developed into what it is today. Talk a little bit about your team. So it's obviously not just you running and gunning, doing all this yourself. What does the full team look like?
Yeah. So tech art and media is our what we say is our secret sauce, right? And so for a long time, I was building technology and saying like, "Oh, tech is what's gonna change the world." And then as I met Dario Otero, heavy influencer working with young people in media, I met him 4 years ago. We started collaborating together, and then Mike, the artist on the squad, the creative, brilliant genius, he leads the art side, and so the three of us really leaning into like the cross section of tech, art, and media is actually the secret sauce. The analogy we always use is like all the streaming services, right? Netflix, Hulu, Disney, blah, blah, blah. Like they all actually work pretty similar, right?
Hmm.
You
Hmm.
open up the app, you search by name or genre or whatever, and you press play and the thing works. But the actual value of each platform is the original content, and original content is king and queen. And so really the technology around Schoolz is like the simple part. The value is actually the original artistic media that we're pulling from the community. And when I say pulling, I mean we're trying to uplift these assets. And so just think about this library of rich content. We'll just start with short stories and say like short stories for third and fourth grade from creatives all across the community. submitting content to us. We then bring seasoned educators to say, oh, this is an amazing story. We're going to wrap questions around it focused on being resilient. And so now teachers across the country can essentially say, like, hey, I want to search for an amazing resilient story written by or with a Hispanic main character. And it's just like we have that because we're creating this ecosystem of underserved and overlooked creatives in the community that know exactly the type of content they would have wanted to engage in the classroom. And we're saying, like, hey, here's the container, create within this container. And then literally like just bringing in the amazing educators to say, this is exactly what we needed to get the engagement. Now we just have to use our skills as seasoned educators to like wrap the curriculum around the content to like reach these learning objectives. And so holistically at a high level, it is, you got the technology for scale, but it's bringing creatives and educators to the table to create this new framework, this sharing economy that works for education, because sharing economy is working everywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
Education's just slow and old and antiquated, but because of COVID and this virtual learning being part of the new norm, virtual learning is going to be a real thing for a long time, and we're going to ride that wave.
So is it hard for you to find content creators? Is that a challenge?
The challenge is paying them their worth, right? It is, here's what I learned when I launched Shorties or when I was working with creatives. They were like, hey, Mondo, this is a great idea. This is a huge opportunity. We get that. But what you're saying is the same thing that every other company or organization says when they come to the artist community. Hey, here's an opportunity. You should pour your genius into this thing and you might make some money later, but we're not going to pay you up front, even though we know that we need you to actually make this thing feel good. And so learning that and really like understanding the starving artists community, and knowing that like, oh, that's a real thing, but also recognizing like how valuable their creative genius is was the biggest challenge. And so right now we're going to heavily lean into fundraising, and it's literally like, can we pay these amazing creatives in the community to build this first, we'll just say, series of content to disrupt education, and pay them equitably because they deserve it.
Then how are school districts and educators accepting the platform?
Yeah, so I would say we are in the early stages of figuring out exactly how to perfectly frame it, right? So right now, the content that we're building, we just share for free and we go directly to educators. We're skipping districts or principals and all that. And we're just saying like, hey, let's get this in the hands of you teachers and you tell us if it makes sense, if it works. They're already using platforms like Teachers Pay Teachers to like go find activities and things. And so we're like, okay, if that model is working, can we create a similar model that focuses on culturally rich content? But we got to talk to the end user, the teachers and the students to make sure that we're building the right thing.
Yeah, every time we've talked, students first, which will push to the parents, right? And then they're going to tell the educators. It's a backwards way of thinking about it, but really, like if the students create the demand. So I think this is my call out to anyone that has kids. Who are your target audience from a child standpoint?
Yeah, right now we're hyper focused on 3rd and 4th grade.
All right. So if you've got a 3rd and 4th grader, then click on the link in the show notes and go there and let these children consume this content, because it's such good stuff. Like what you're building here is amazing. You're hardcore focused on fundraising right now. What does that look like? And then talk to me a little about what is the next year? What does the balance of 2021 look like for Schoolz?
Yeah, so fundraising is going to be a long haul. Federal government, everybody in the country is just like, hey, we're going to pour a lot of money into communities. One of the big like ticket items is education.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we want to do is position ourselves to ensure that the same people that created the inequitable system prior to COVID, like the traditional school model,
Mm-hmm.
isn't making all the decisions on what virtual learning is going to look like. And so we want to position ourselves for that. We recently got a 200K Bush Innovation Grant, which we haven't announced yet, but we'll announce it here on
Oh, I
C9
like that. Yeah, I love to hear that.
podcast, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so like that's gonna kick off the fundraising moving forward. And so the goal is $40 million to support the next 4 years, and that is bringing creatives and educators to the table to really create this framework
Mm-hmm.
around what content should look, sound, and feel like. And then also in that 40 million, it's pouring capital into our nonprofit artist organizations that are amazing. Like our community of creatives is number one, if not like an argument with like, hey, New York might have more creative capacity. Cool. But like Minnesota is amazing and diverse, and our micro communities all have their own authentic voices. And so Minnesota is just prime to disrupt education if we actually bet on the community that we never bet on, right? Like we always go to help. Oh, we want to help the underserved or overlooked and all that, which is cool. But it's like, well, what if you look at them as the actual asset, right? Like, oh, they're the iPhone, right? They are the gift that will keep giving. And so if we pour into them, if we create a framework or structure to create in, and we give our creative economy the resources to just create and say, hey, you're going to be able to impact kindergartners through sixth graders through your creativity, whether it's written illustrated short stories or poetry or mini documentaries or whatever. It's like they're going to say, absolutely, we have the capacity to do it. It's just organizing and getting it done. And so anyways, I say all that to say Minnesota, the Twin Cities right now, or the past few years, have ranked last in like data around educating kids of color across the country, right? Like dead last. And so this is a huge opportunity for Minnesota to actually be a trailblazer and jump to the front. Like this moment right now, as we enter into this new digital learning like season, Minnesota has the opportunity to lean into the work and lead. And so it's up to us, right? It's up to me to tell the compelling story, but then it's up to leaders in Minnesota to say, yep, we're actually gonna bet big on something that we never bet big on, right? And I think that's the biggest thing in our community. We definitely love to help people start, but we got to make some big bold bets, and so we'll see if this is one of them.
And I love the fact that your mission and your vision in this is to lift up other people, lift up the creators and the creatives that are producing this content, and let their voice be heard while making sure that students are consuming the right information. And the other thing I love about you, just as a human being, is that this is part of what this is just a micro part of what you want to create for the future for yourself, because your whole vision for you is to be able to pour all of this power that you've been building up and all of the steam that you've been building up and pour it into other entrepreneurs, in whether it be financially or in ways of resource or something like that. It's all very focused on the give. And I love that about what you're trying to do now and what you want to do in the future.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because that shift, right, was definitely changed the trajectory, right? So prior to going to FAMU, I was the young, I want to be an athlete. I'm going to take care of my family. I want to be rich and successful. And then when I went to FAMU, historically Black college, literally like they infused how big the rest of the world was, like historically, and just like, it's bigger than you. It's bigger than whatever you're doing right now. And I internalized it and I've carried it with me ever since. And so, yeah, like everything is one, I am not shy of big business and earning a lot of money, right? Like that's never been a thing like, oh, you can't have impact and also be wealthy, right? It's just like, no, you can actually do both. And so like, I'm going to show you what that looks like. And so all the things that I look to build is to build wealth. But then once the wealth is with me and within the community, right, the sharing economy, it's now how do we use that wealth to even pour into more people? And so that's where I'm at. The Alchemist is my favorite book. If anybody's ever read The Alchemist, read it again. If you haven't, like, you should read it. And like, as I read that book, last thing I'll say about this, like the first time I read the book, it didn't really resonate because I read it through the lens of the shepherd. The second time I read the book, like 4 years later, it was now number 2 book in like must reads for me. I read every year because I read it through the lens of The Alchemist, which literally just poured into the shepherd. Like whenever he needed the right guidance, right support, right connection, like The Alchemist always gave just enough to ensure that that person could reach their treasure. And so that's what brings me the most joy. I never doubt, right? I talk about my dad. I never doubt where I'm going to go, how successful I can become. Like that's already written for me. And so I just go and try to do the right things to make sure that other people are fulfilled because my story is already on its way.
Oh, I love it. I'm so honored and grateful to have you as a part of our community, and your voice needs to be continually heard, and for you to be on this podcast to talk about these things, people need to hear your story and need to hear what you're all about. And I'm so proud to have you on and be a buddy.
Man, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you because you have poured into me as well. And so like, I'll just say lastly, like yesterday, somebody hit me up and was just like, hey, Mondo, what was the biggest entrepreneurial mistake you've ever made? And I was like, thinking that I knew what I was doing when I didn't, right? Like I was so focused, like, yes, this is right. And then the last 2 years, I was like, oh, all the things that you were saying with pure fidelity, those were actually wrong right now in retrospect. And a lot of that is because now I have wiser counsel, right? You being one of the people that C9 group and just other people that's like have done it before saying like, hey, here's actually the best practice. And so thank you for trusting me and pouring back into me.
All right. That's our virtual hug. We'll get that out of the way before we jump into 9 questions. I'm going to transition into 9 questions here. I want to clarify and make sure that everyone knows you do not know the questions I'm about to fire at you.
Got it. How long do I get to think between questions?
One thing that you said to me in prep was that, remember, I'm an introvert. So I did think about that. I did think about that, but introvert or extrovert, I really don't care. You're going to get what you get. So fire it away. Number 1. All right. The blockbuster of the summer is a movie called The Black Tech Guy. Who plays you in that movie?
Oh, great question. Probably Michael B. Jordan.
Oh, I love it. He's got a new movie coming out on Amazon Prime, and it looks.
I think it came out today, didn't it?
Did it? Oh, all right. So today is what is it? April.
Maybe
30th,
we just hit him up and plant that seed.
Yeah. All right. Good. All right. That's a great choice. All right. Do me a favor. Close your eyes. All right. What's your favorite smell?
Great question. Food of any sorts.
Give me a specific, just one.
I love Hispanic food. So if I smell like natural Hispanic good food, I'm good.
Oh, I love it. And living where you live, like I'm sure all the restaurants and stuff that are in that area in St. Paul, you get so many different food smells. So regardless of what ethnicity it is, you're going to get a cornucopia of goodness there, huh?
Yeah, I am. I like to eat. I'm trying to eat more healthy these days, but I love to eat.
I love it. Me too. It's a problem. All right. What do you do to reset yourself?
Ooh, so I used to love to go to the movies by myself. COVID kind of shut that down, and so I had to create the movie theater in my own home. But literally, it's going to the movies, and it's a very specific reason because I despise people that answer the phone in the movies. It is like a pet peeve of mine.
Yeah. Right?
So
who does that anyway?
Right. And so I'm like, well, if I go to the movies, I know I have to turn off everything else, right? Like no emails, no text, no nothing. And so it's just a way that forces me to get away from the world. And I'm always reset, especially if it's a good movie.
All right. I love that. What is one quality in a person that really impresses you?
I will say unapologetic honesty, right? Like non-Minnesota nice
Hmm.
honesty. Because they feel like they're comfortable and confident enough in themselves that like they can tell you when they disagree, and that's a prerequisite for everybody on our team, right? One of the books that I'm finishing up reading is called Radical Candor, and it talks
Mm.
exactly about that. Like, how do you build a culture of radically candid partners that's like going to challenge what you're doing to get to what's right, right? The biggest thing that stuck in my head was, does your team want to be right or does your team want to get it right? And so like really focusing on getting it right is key.
I will say that for our non-Minnesota listeners, there's a big difference between Minnesota nice and Minnesota kind. So people from not from Minnesota typically think of Minnesota as really nice people. That is a pretty true statement. Minnesota nice is actually just passive aggressive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just wanted to
Like,
get that out
are you
there.
just gonna? Can you just say it out loud, please?
Yeah, right.
So
Don't.
yeah, that's one thing that I value. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, good. All right. What is a guilty pleasure that you love to indulge in? And it doesn't
Oh
have to be
man,
food related.
well, that's the first thing that came to my mind because I've been not eating it, right? So
All
like
right.
I was like, hey, I'm going to try to focus better on my health. So let me not eat all the ice cream. And so typically I get this Ben and Jerry's like strawberry cheesecake ice cream, and then I would just literally eat a whole carton.
Sounds so
And I
good.
haven't done it in a couple months. But now saying it out loud is making me wish I had some right now.
I know.
So.
If I lived closer, I'd go get some and I'd share it with you because that sounds amazing. COVID or no COVID, I could care less. I just want some Ben and Jerry's strawberry cheesecake ice cream.
Right. Oh man.
That's awesome. If you could be any animal, what would you be and why? Besides human.
Ooh, got it. Um, any animal, I would I would probably be something. Here's how non-sea creature I am. I would be something in the sea that can go deep just so I can see what's down there. Like,
Cool.
I don't even understand the type of sea creatures that are down there, but like, hey, we spend so much time wanting to go in space and like go see all these other things. And it's like, yo, there's actually probably some real cool things happening deep
Right.
in the
Yeah.
sea or in the ocean. So something that can get down there.
Probably at that point when you were watching that special on PBS on the apps, there was probably right after that a nature episode where they were talking about 50 miles down into the ocean in the middle of
Right.
the right. That's insane. That's
Right.
hard for me to even fathom. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Good answer.
Yeah,
I
that would
love
be
that.
interesting.
I love it. When I say the term leader, who do you immediately think of?
Great question. Um, I would say Michael Jordan because I'd watched The Last Dance about a
Mm.
month and a half ago. And his tenacity was unmatched. And I would say I would call him a definitive leader because everybody in every single interview all said the same thing about just he knew how to turn it on and he never turned it off in the game. Like he just knew himself and he knew how to like amp himself up to be his best. It didn't matter who they were playing. And so there's a certain type of skill to be able to do that. And it's something that I didn't have playing basketball all the time. I needed
Mm.
somebody a lot of times to like talk stuff or do the, to like, oh, really? You want to turn
Yeah.
this into that type of game instead of just coming with that tenacious energy, irregardless of the opponent. And so having that all the time is important to me, I feel like.
And I think in watching that, I watched that I think last year, and the thing I loved about that is the story it told about how big of a deal leadership became to him because they weren't that good. They as a team they weren't that good. Like they couldn't win. They couldn't get over the hump of winning the championship. They were losing in the semis and stuff like that. But then once his Phil Jackson taught him the power of being a leader, that's when they kicked it into high gear, and that's when they won all their championships.
Yeah, the crazy thing about this is when I think about the 96 Bulls, because I use this analogy sometimes within our team, I'm actually not Michael Jordan. I'm actually Phil Jackson. And so
Yeah.
I would say Mike, right, on the team is more of like, you are the best creative on the planet to me, right? And so that's the Jordan, and you are the best at that thing. And so for me, it's just creating the triangle offense to make sure all this stuff works together. Like, what does that system look like? What is that big vision? And so that's where I like to play. And that's why I get silent. I whiten, you see a whiteboard in the background. If you're watching this, like I
Yeah.
whiteboard every single day to just get the things that are in my brain out so I can see
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. And plus you need like BJ Armstrong and Horace Grant and all those other guys
Yeah,
to make it happen, right?
man, straight up.
Well, I could talk about Last Dance all day. All right. What technology do you think will change the world as we know it?
Mm, I think that there's going to be a tipping point in artificial intelligence. And we don't even know what that even looks or sounds or feels like. But one day, just like every single movie ever, that artificial intelligence goes to the next level. And we're like, well, now what do we do? Because it's smarter than everybody. Like, whether it's good or not so good, it's going to be AI that does something crazy.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. What is your go-to for inspiration?
Ooh, great question. So, I mean, two part. My go-to for motivation is
Mm,
typically Eric Thomas. And so just motivational speaker, when I listen to him, his energy and his passion is second to none. And so you can't listen to him and not feel motivated to go do something. I am inspired by people that just want to do something different. Right. And I think that's where like uh my knack for or feeling fulfilled when like I'm pouring into somebody else, it's because like seeing somebody say like, hey, the way the
mm,
world is or the way my life is, I don't agree that this is how it's supposed to be. I want to do something different. I want to create something different or be bold. And like that inspires me to like help or support in any way. And so I always accept calls. It might not be right away, but if somebody's like, yo, I want to do something and I just need somebody to bounce an idea off, like that inspires me and I always find time for that. So
I love it. Uh, you inspire me. I'm so excited that we get to drop this episode at some point. I'm so thankful to have you in my friendship circle and obviously as a member of Coalition 9. And thanks so much for being on the podcast today, man.
thanks. It was fun. I'm gonna text you and let you know if I go get ice cream by day's end.
Well, you can text me all you want, but you got to put a picture on there to prove it.
All right, we'll do.
All right. All right. All right. So, on behalf of Mondo Davison, this has been the Power of Nine podcast. I am your host, Aaron Eggert, and I want to thank you for the privilege of your time.